Uh, just letting people know that we are recording this so that it can be a permanent resource for others that are starting to use this tool. First of all, let's introduce ourselves. I'll go first. My name is Marcia Choi, and I am the lead for the academic coordinators of clinical education at the School of Audiology and Speech Sciences. Over to you, Lisa.
Hello, and my name is Lisa Left, and I am a speech pathologist also, and I am also another academic clinical coordinator or coordinator of clinical education here at UBC SAS.
Haley.
Hi, my name's Bailey Fenello. I'm a program administrator, and I work from the Victoria site.
And there's other members of our team on the call as well. Cheryl, Darlene, Evan, I saw. So welcome, everyone, audiology and speech language pathology clinical educators. Before we launch into this session, we do want to send our very sincere and deep gratitude for your support of our students, particularly in this next session, spring-summer session. Today, we will be introducing the Canadian Assessment of Clinical Competence, or we will be calling ACC. This is a clinical education performance assessment tool that the school and the Canadian programs have committed to using to assess performance on placements. This will be one of two sessions. The second session, there'll be two options, two dates, and during which you will receive lots of help with practicing applying the tool to cases or even past students that you have had experience with evaluating. Those two dates are April 2 and 10, 2025. Today is recorded. If you are here for an externship 1 or 2, you will be using this tool. We are switching right over with the new cohort using and starting with this tool as their placement assessment tool. If you are here for an externship 4 student, you will continue to use the old tool, but we really encourage you to engage with this tool during your externship 4 so that the transition to using it for any subsequent students is easy. So first of all, we want to acknowledge that Lisa and I are presenting from UBC Point Grey, which is situated on the unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. By the end of this session, you should be prepared for the upcoming changes to the evaluation of students during placements. You should be able to see the difference between skill-based and competency-based tools for evaluating those students during placements and get a first exposure to what this new tool entails. As acknowledgement, this tool is the result of many years of collaboration between all the Canadian programs. There are 5 SLP and audiology programs in Canada and 7 only speech pathology programs. And this effort is both Francophone and English programs. So just a wonderful group of over 35 individuals. As background, it's good to know where this comes from as part of the why. In 2005, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada adopted something called the CAN-MEDS framework, and it was adopted in medical education as well as evaluation. So this was the impetus to shifting to competency-based education in other health programs, including us, physio, and OT. It also resulted in the development of speech and audiology competency profiles. In 2011, there was an organization that proposed competencies that would align with the CAN-MEDS framework. And in 2018, the regulators, we would call the colleges, developed the competency profiles, which we had quite a bit of input into as Canadian academic coordinators of clinical education, or ACES. In 2014, our heads and directors, the Council of Accreditation, as well, entrusted us with developing a national clinical education assessment tool, which is what you see today. So a lot of input, a lot of years, and a lot of effort on part of all the Canadian programs. The why is really important to articulate. There is accountability and responsibility. As an accredited program, a Canadian university program in audiology and speech language pathology, we are accountable to our Council of Accreditation. We are also accountable to the Canadian Council of University Programs, which is largely made up of our heads and directors and leaders. And finally, we are responsible for making sure that those competency profiles are reflected in our curriculum and our evaluation. We're also responsible to align evaluation with education standards. So if we have competency-based education standards and our curriculum is accountable to them, the challenge now is to demonstrate outcomes that are observable and measurable in real professional and clinical applications. And that this is a consistent approach with other evaluations used for other regulated health profession programs. Finally, we ask ourselves, are we evaluating the right things during placements and our curriculum? And if we are, how does our evaluation support the formative development of students, as well as increase the transparency in our expectations? Are we providing enough clear information about how, when, and what we expect from the student, and also what we expect of their achievements during each placement? So a real focus, you will notice in our tool, which is different than the other health programs, is a very robust roadmap for how you get from novice to entry to practice. And that's something that is custom for our profession, speech and audiology programs. So I'll hand over to Lisa to share with you where you come from, what you know, and I will pick up to where we need to be. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Marcia. So on this slide here, these categories of our current skills-based assessment tools should be very familiar to you. This tool will still be used in the coming externship for our second year students this year, as Marcia said. And for those of you who've had students before, these 5 categories should look very familiar. So what we've looked at in the past are the areas of professional practice, interpersonal and professional skills, assessment, treatment, which includes amplification and rehabilitation in speech pathology and audiology, and communication skills. And as you see, aside from the first category of professional practice, which is rated on unsatisfactory, inconsistent to satisfactory, the other 4 categories are rated numerically between 1 to 7, based on whether these discrete skills are acquired or still emerging.
Oops.
Our current midterm evaluation is just a much abbreviated version of this current final assessment, and is meant to be a marker of the student's progress at midterm, and helps the clinical educators and the students to develop goals and strategies for the remainder of placement. Marcia will talk about the new tool, but our goal with the new tool is both at midterm and final evaluation, you'll be using the same exact tool at both times. There we go. As clinical educators now, what you're looking at with these discrete skills is the student's independence in applying the skill, and the amount and type of support that the clinical educator needs to provide in order for the student to apply or use this skill. So as educators, you are always using your judgment on whether the skill is emerging or acquired. And as we said, traditionally, you've been rating these skills on whether they're emerging or acquired on that numerical rating of 1 to 7. With the new tool, as Marcia said, we've moved towards a competency-based approach to bring our programs in line with other health profession programs across Canada. And as she said, we're very proud of the fact that it's been a collaboration between all the Master's Communication Disorders programs across the country. It's been developed both in French and in English, and it actually is being put in place at schools like McGill and University of Alberta already in those languages. We also have customized assessments for both audiology and speech pathology because we recognize that their skills and practice are different. But what we'd like to stress is that your role as clinical educators is the exact same. You're not changing anything about the way that you're actually performing or supporting your student throughout their externship. You will still be seeing the same caseload you always have. You're not trying to recreate or create any new opportunities for your students. It's the same experiences you had before. We're just looking at the students' outcomes or competencies in a different way by using this tool. Currently, as we looked at with the ratings, there's 46 skills that are assessed in our old evaluation. And in the new tool, as Marcia will talk about, there's 23 competencies that will be rated. So we're hopeful that you'll become quicker and the new evaluation should be more streamlined as you become familiar with it. So what will stay the same? In this slide, you can see a lot of familiar areas that you're already looking at in those 5 categories that you've already rated. So you're still looking at assessment and treatment. You're still looking at oral and written communication skills of the student. You're still looking at the students and their ability to use their foundational theory and apply it in practice with real life clients. We're looking for students to take ownership of their skills, and we also want to see them become strong collaborators with their team, with their clients, and with their families. So this will all stay the same. We're just looking and evaluating these competencies in a bit of a refreshed way.
So I will explain the difference between current state and the imminent future state. So with the skill-based, you are observing and rating and evaluating their specific skills, their performance during tasks, and your observations are of them during the completion of these tasks. When we move to CBA, or competency-based assessment, we notice the focus shifts. And what we really value about this approach is we see our clinical educators currently making judgments. And those judgments are, there are skills that I am evaluating, but I feel and observe and notice competence. And what that means is how those skills are applied in real world situations in your caseload. CBA is also the source of assessment data, comes from a range of inputs. There may be a portfolio at the school, there may be role playing in classes, standardized patients, and the gold standard, of course, for assessment is placement experiences. That is where you are going to see that knowledge, skill, and ultimately competence translate to a real caseload. The other thing is the scope is a bit broader than the skills-based assessment because it recognizes that competencies aren't you got them, you don't got them. They actually follow a sequential level of mastery, which will become clear as we share more in the tool. And that it really honors our teacher lens on the student because it does take into account a holistic view, seeing the outcome being an integration of the competencies. So for me and for many people, a concrete example is a good way to describe the difference. If let's talk about learning how to swim. So in a skill-based approach, learning how to swim, I would see my learner demonstrate proficiency in maybe freestyle strokes. I would see good arm movement, breathing technique, body position, and kicking rhythm. And that is what I would evaluate. And you remember getting those swimming card report cards? That's what it looks like. In a competency-based approach, the competency would be, for example, water safety. So a learner who is competent would be able to swim a reasonable distance, but would also have awareness of their surroundings and know how to conduct themselves in a safe way, for example, in a public pool where it's very crowded and noisy. So there is a slight difference in our lens in the CBA model. This has particular value when there may be a situation where you have knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are good, but the demonstration or the application or the integration into a real client interaction or case is wanting. And the competency approach is very well suited to that gap. And more importantly, navigating that gap to create goals. So we had talked about CanMEDS as being the trigger for all of these things, the things that started this CBA shift. There are 7 roles that are evaluated in a competency-based assessment, and each of them was determined to be essential for entry to practice clinicians from those agencies and bodies that I had described in the background slide. We have expert that includes that foundational knowledge, assessment and intervention skills, communicator, both oral and written, collaborator, which is with your clients as well as other people on your team or stakeholders, advocate, which is how a student or learner or entry to practice clinician ensures that the profession and also the well-being of client and education is conducted. Scholar is something our students need to focus on in our program as well. What are the attitudes and skills they need to have lifelong, continuous focus on learning to maintain their competence and proficiency in the field? Manager is largely the internal management of caseload, time, and other workplace functions. And then ultimately professional, where is the conduct, the integrity, the adherence to ethics, and good care is evaluated. There are some terms, and I will admit, even for myself, it takes a while for me to grasp this, but I would suggest you think about it in terms of levels. So a role are those purple and pink things. And under the role, there are abilities that are required of the clinician upon entry to practice in Canada. So those are decided by our partners that we're accountable to. Under each of those essential competencies, we have identified key components, things that contribute to that ability. And when you combine them, you achieve that essential competency. The thing that is custom to our programs is the inclusion of milestones. And this is that roadmap on how do I get that subcompetency? How do I develop that subcompetency? What do I expect of the student as they move through their levels of competence? So try to remember these 3. And Lisa will talk about these competencies and some of the differences between Audie and speech.
Mm-hmm. So what you see here is more of an outline of what Marcia just described for the different levels. So going from roles to essential competencies to sub-competencies. But the programs, when they developed the tool, recognized there needed to be different competencies, particularly within the role of expert between audiology and speech pathology. So I'd like to draw your attention to the first box where you see role of expert, then 1.1 knowledge expert, and then to 1.1a and 1.1b. Audiologists, of course, are recognized for their applying or application of profession-specific knowledge to prevention, identification, and management of auditory, vestibular, and balance system disorders. So their knowledge expert section, of course, would reflect competencies in this area. Whereas if we look at the next slide, just wait for that. Thanks, Marcia. You'll see that for speech pathology, our roles there are the same or similar, but they're in prevention, identification, and management of communication disorders and feeding and swallowing disorders. So it's important that our roles are defined in our tools to reflect this difference in knowledge. But as you can see, generally, the rest of the assessment area is similar, but specific to our professions. So require a speech pathologist and clinical expert. Sorry, Marcia, I think we're
Oh,
one
sorry,
back still.
that's my
That's
bad.
okay. Yeah, so in 1.2 and 1.3, you'll see that assessment and intervention are the same broad general goals, but they're using the terminology for speech pathology and audiology. Whereas the rest, now it's time to go on to the following slide. The rest of the 6 roles reflect the same sort of scope of practice. So role of communicator, collaborator, advocate, etc. These are shared competencies that we expect our students in both professions to be able to apply. So for instance, we would want to see a student in placement, regardless of audiology or speech pathology, be a good team collaborative member and be able to work with their clients, other team members, physicians, in order to deliver client-centered holistic care. And similarly, we would expect that both students in both professions, rather, would be able to be thorough communicators, both in oral and written communication skills.
Thanks, Lisa. So what would you be measuring with this new tool? There are 23 essential competencies. And what you would be noticing or observing and thinking about as you observe your student are 3 things. The amount of guidance that you provide, including how often and how specific you need to be. The complexity of the situation. Are they performing in the familiar routine tasks and interactions, or is this something you notice also in complex situations? And then finally, the length of time required to complete a task or clinical activity. Sometimes you will have an essential competency that is not applicable, and there will be categories for not applicable. Also, there will be a rating for unsatisfactory as well. And as we progress to the practice session in April, we will unpack that so that you will feel like your caseload is represented in your practice. So what do you rate? What are the numbers you're rating now? So we're not doing 1 to 7 anymore, but we have six possible places where you would rate each of those essential competency. And we'll share more about what those essential competency looks like in a couple examples later on in this presentation. So when the student enters a placement, we would expect them to be at early novice. And as they progress, by the time they finish their 4th placement, the expectation is that they have made progress and that they are entry to practice. So each of these boxes represents those 3 things: the amount of guidance you provide and how specific. The complexity, is it familiar to complex? And also the amount of time it takes for them to complete the tasks. We will provide you at UBC with the targets, with the rating expected for each role by the end of their placement. So you will have a benchmark, you will have a place to think and to use as a reference point to evaluate your student. And we'll also provide you more guidance in assigning and interpreting what this entry to practice is constitutes, given your caseload there. Entry to practice is a term that really we need to support a shift in understanding because entry to practice is not the stop of their learning and it is not the end of their continuum. It is new graduate, and we all know that new graduates require more modeling and support and targeted professional development. And so the entry to practice is that point in the continuum. And depending on what your caseload is, we can also help and support you to interpret entry to practice for your particular sector or caseload, so it isn't confounding as a rating. So we're going to do a few examples. I'll do the first and Lisa would do another one. So if we go back to the terminology, there is a role. The role in this example is expert, and under it is knowledge, assessment, and treatment. But we're just going to say role is expert, and we've picked one essential competency that is underneath it. My job is to rate that essential competency with one of these ratings, from non-applicable to entry to practice. And as you can see, there are 2 points in time where this is done, midterm and final. So the tool does not change, as Lisa says, depending on the point in time. It is the same tool. The essential competency, so the ability under the role of expert that I have chosen is uses evidence and clinical reasoning to guide professional decisions. And for this person, they've assigned their student intermediate. Underneath the essential competency will be bullets, and those are sub-competencies, which are essentially key competencies, key components, things that must happen for that essential competency to be achieved. In this case, there are 2 bullets. In other cases, there could be 5 or 6. And this allows you to really drill down on why you gave that intermediate rating, or drill down so you can assign a rating. So in this case, there are 2 sub-competencies, and you don't rate it, but that rating of the essential competency is heavily informed by these. And you may see some of them, you may not see some of these bullets in your practice. In this case, in this example, I want to unpack this particular bullet, applies clinical reasoning skills to clinical practice, a little bit more. And I don't have to do it for every bullet, but in this case, I would like to unpack it a bit more and just validate where I've landed. I would pull up the milestones for that bullet. Each bullet has milestones. The milestones map from novice to entry to practice. They give you milestones in what you would observe in the student's behavior. They are explicit, they are concrete, and they are observable. So this is probably, a added value because what it says is it is transparent what you expect to see with an entry to practice, intermediate, and novice. And while it doesn't give you the 6 ratings, it does give you those places where you can compare your observation to a particular point in time in their development. So in this case, I would, because I've assigned intermediate, and I just want to be sure I'm right, I would want to make sure that that middle column is like, yeah, that is exactly what I'm seeing. And it gives you just an extra resource. You do not have to consult all the milestones for every one of those bullets. You do not. Having said that, I know some of us will do it anyways, but it is available for that reason. And it creates a really nice model and reference when you are making goals and you are giving feedback to your student about where you hope they will progress to or what you recognize them doing. So Lisa's going to do another.
All right. Yes, thanks, Marcia. All right, and just one thing I wanted to add on there that's really handy that we can thank our program administrator Bailey for is that when you're doing the online, or if you're doing the online version of the ACC, she has made a fillable PDF for the ratings. And when you go to the ratings of the sub-competencies, if you hover over the ratings, it will lead you to a document of all the milestones. It's a pretty big document, but it's pretty easy to navigate through to your specific sub-competency, so you can find out more examples of the milestones. So Marcia gave you one example. I'm also going to give you an example of how we came to a determination of intermediate for again, the role is expert, and it's the conduction of an assessment, so 1.2.C that we're looking at. And within the sub-competencies specifically, I'd like to give a case that talks about management of behavior within the assessment session. And I think this will be familiar for a lot of us who've had students. So let's take the case, for instance, that you have a student, you're a school-based clinical educator, and you're planning an assessment session for a child with autism. You know a little bit about the student from the classroom teacher, and you've worked with them just informally for a few sessions already. So you know that there's potentially triggers in the behaviors from the child. And while you have assessment goals for the session, you know that there's a potential that the child may not be able to stick with you for the full assessment time. During the assessment, the child does start to become distracted, doesn't attend to the tasks at hand, and starts to wander off and do something else in the room. And even though the student looks over at you as the CE and seems to recognize that they're flailing and not sure what to do, they're unable to either follow the child's lead in the moment or to redirect the child back to the test that you're trying to complete. So in this particular case, while the student was able to talk with you both before about potential behaviors and triggers for the child, and they were able to talk and identify these behaviors after the session, the key difference here is that the student was unable to apply management techniques within the session. And if we go to the next slide here, thank you, Marcia. You'll see that with these 3 ratings of benchmarks of the milestones, that they are at an intermediate level where they can consider the causes, they consider the triggers of behaviors, and they can adjust the behavior managements to plan for changes in future sessions, but they're not at the entry to practice because they were not able to make those online changes within a session. And I think that should be a pretty clear-cut, familiar example, and something I certainly remember feeling like as a student myself. And so this student would be rated at intermediate. If you felt like they were somewhere between the two, even though you do not have on the milestone sheet, we do not have an outline milestones for all of the 6 ratings, it's possible that maybe at a future time, the student was able to recognize the behaviors in session, but is unable to make those changes, or is able to make some changes, but not fully successful, then you might actually rate them up a bit, and then they would be advanced intermediate. And that's where your judgment of rating between these big milestone categories comes in.
Great. So where is this form? I have a screenshot of the audiology page that would allow you to access these. You can see down at the bottom, it says new. So we do have students that will continue to be assessed with the old tool. Audiology externship 3 and 4 will use the old tool. Speech pathology externship 4 this year will use the old tool, but anything from spring 2025 onwards, that cohort will be using the ACC. So Bailey is going to stick the links to the evaluation tool and the milestones into the chat, so it's something you can bookmark. And that way you can see firsthand what it looks like. Everybody okay there? While you're taking a quick look at what seems to be pages and pages, we can talk about what will happen when you are performing and delivering this evaluation. First of all, it will be our job to send you the targets for each role and the expected level by the end of your externship completion. So there'll be a target for end of externship 1, 2, 3, and 4 for each role. You'll complete the ACC at midterm and final and share it with the student, and the student will share it with us. We really highly value the feedback and comments that you put into the fields for each of the essential competencies if you have feedback and comments. This field and these fields can make a significant difference in how the school interprets the students' learning, development, and performance in the placement setting. So please add your comments and feedback. They do make a difference in this particular tool. As you see, it's a fillable PDF with links to the full milestone document, and the links in the chat are where you can access, but it is on the community of practice in externship resources for each of the disciplines. The midterm and finals are returned to the school. Our ACE team determines the mark, which is issued by the school only for the final evaluation. And then Lisa could talk about the next steps from our school.
So while today and last April, if anyone came to the talk last year when the ACC tool was being introduced, today is meant to be a general overview and sort of a broad strokes approach to the tool to give you an introduction and hopefully to link you to the right places to look at the tool in more depth yourself. Closer to the start of externships 1 and 2, and even before externship 4, we plan on 2 more practice sessions. So we've set them for Wednesday, April 2nd, as you see on screen, and Thursday, April 10th, hoping to capture people who work on different days. Again, lunchtime sessions. We can bring case studies to these assessments, but what we're really hoping is that you will come with either a particular student or some particular competency areas in mind that you'd like to hash out and use the tool to see where you might put those students. So we're hoping that this is much more interactive, hands-on practice, and we can give some feedback as we go during the sessions.
We will not record any training sessions. We do ask that you de-identify any information if you are using a student's past final evaluation. And Sasha Brown from Audiology will also be attending so that we can provide a more full suite of support. At this point, we very much like to hear any questions, any thoughts. It is 12:40 and we do have time. Feel free if you must leave. We want to honor your own lunch hour. But if there are any questions at all, please let us know verbally or on the chat.
We have one question here in the chat. Have the milestones or the tool generally changed at all since the trial run last year?
There have been some minor changes based on the feedback from the pilot, and those were done nationally. So there are some minor changes.
I just have a comment to make. We didn't talk about this today, but one thing that we're doing here at the school, or I should say, we have planned in one of our externship practice courses, the students will also, the year one students will also be introduced to the tool. So they will have some familiarity of what they're being rated on and what the tool is all about. So the students will have some pre-knowledge of that themselves.
Thanks, Lisa. Any other questions? So with that, I'm assuming we're done. I want to thank you all for your attention and your support of this fairly sizable change. Oh, I see something in the chat. There's a few, maybe those are thank yous.
Just kind comments.
I know many, many years ago at UBC, I'm a graduate at UBC, it was the same tool as the one that we are aging out. And I'm very pleased that this is more reflective of clinical competence and the application of their knowledge in a very, very valuable part of their training, the clinical placement. So on that note, please accept the gratitude again of our school for your support of this initiative and also of our student and our program. This is heavily aligned also with our upcoming renewed SLP curriculum. And it is very gratifying to see all these pieces weaved together for what we hope is our graduates that can be of value to their clients and your teams. Thank you very much.